Hey there, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of our series with Rachael Belcher. Today, we're talking about one of the most important aspects of our profession, and that is mental health. If you haven't listened to part 1, our guest is someone who has walked the walk, faced the challenges head on, and come out stronger on the other side. With nearly 3 decades in the fire service and 21 years as a paramedic, Rachael Belcher knows firsthand the weight we carry as first responders. From the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina to countless shifts on the streets, she's seen the physical and emotional toll of this work. But it wasn't until she took a step back and prioritized her own wellness that she found her true calling, advocating for the mental health of first responders. Rachael's groundbreaking article, Grief on the Frontline, Managing Our Hidden Wounds, shines a light on what she calls duty-bound grief, a form of grief unique to our profession. Today, we'll talk about what that means, why it matters, and how we can build resilience while breaking the stigma of asking for help. Let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Keep the Promise podcast, where we help build resilient and well-rounded firefighters.
There's always going to be those sticky calls that, no matter how much healing journeys you go on, are going to get to us. But yeah, I felt more prepared, and I did not have a miraculous healing after 30 days. I mean, it probably took me another year and a half after that to feel like, okay, all right, I got this. I feel good.
Interesting. So 30 days to get the tools, and then a lot of months after the fact for you to employ those tools.
Yes.
Was it like an epiphany? You woke up one day, you're like, hallelujah, I'm healed. Or did you just notice that as the time went on, you're like, oh, this would have fucked with me in the past?
Yes. Yeah. I noticed that it was not an epiphany. It was not like a light bulb moment. And I mean, I was going to therapy at the beginning there. I was going to therapy once a week. I found an incredible EMDR therapist, and that follow-up portion, I got the tools at Harbor of Grace, but that follow-up portion is really what changed my life, because I don't think no matter what, 30 days is going to heal anything completely, but it at least equips you with what you need to know going forward. So that therapy after, and all the tools that I got from that I could start to kind of put in place for myself in the following, days, weeks, months, years. A lot of those things I'm still using today. And yeah, something will happen and I'll say like, okay, yeah, that that I would not be okay with this 2 years ago. I literally felt like I had brain damage.
Oh.
I felt like I was broken, and I did not think that there was any way for me to be any different. I just thought that this is just what happens to us eventually.
Like a cracked piece of fine china that you can't put back together.
Right. That it's just like, well, this is how I am now. And no one wants to be around me.
Is this around the time that you came up with your duty-bound grief concept, or was that percolating beforehand?
Yeah, that whole journey kind of led to this realization. And but we hear so much about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I talked a lot about it at therapy, and I'm like, I have it, and and she was like, okay, maybe you do. But it's not like you have this and now you have it forever. Fuck you. Goodbye. Like, you're screwed. It's more like you have an injury. You break your leg. Okay. You have an injury and it hurts and it's going to affect your life, but you absolutely will heal from this and hopefully, have full function. So in thinking about the PTSD and how it's more of an injury, I was thinking about all of the things that are recognized as things that are traumatizing to us. Like, I've had a gun held pointed at my head on the job. We've all seen, horrible visuals on calls and things. If you were to say, hey, I saw this thing, they'd be like, oh yeah, that's probably traumatizing. But even though I unpacked all those things in therapy, I still felt that I had this lead blanket over me. Like, why have I done all this work? I have unpacked all of these traumatic calls that I thought were these sticky ones, the nightmare calls, things that would come back to you, the things that would give you anxiety. And I'm still feeling this lead blanket over me of just this heavy feeling. And I came to the realization that it is grief. It is the grief of, years and years of many different things that we experience. And it doesn't have to be our own personal grief. The only death training we get is, break it to me gently.
Yeah.
Don't say they passed. Say they're dead. And it's like, oh God, come on. But this has more to do with how we experience other people's grief. We suck it in like a sponge, and it's not acknowledged. It's not talked about. It's not discussed. And once I made that realization for myself, I started to do some research and is this something that's talked about? Is this something that's taught? And, in a few pieces of literature, I saw the word grief or the mention of grief, but no real further exploration of how or why it affects us and how it can, I say that, without the acknowledgement, it could be like a pretty large branch on the PTSD tree, but it does not have to be.
And I think we're all guilty of, like you said, sucking it up like a sponge. We see those bad things. I go back to those suicide calls. The vibes are just always, the energy is cold and desperate. You just feel it in the air that somebody was so desperate and hopeless that the only way out was to end it all right then and there. And I think unless we're absolute sociopaths, we are going to empathize and we are going to take a little bit of that. And you mentioned in your article the suitcase. We're just stuffing this into that suitcase, and it gets heavier with every call that's traumatic, with everything that we do, unless we start unpacking it.
Right.
Is there some sort of early warning that hey, my suitcase is getting heavy? Is there something that we can share for people to pay attention to? Or is that going to be that individual journey that we all have to just sort of, when the wheels fall off the suitcase, that's when each one of us goes, oh, fuck, I got to do something now.
Right. So retrospectively, I had warning signs, and I knew I had warning signs, but I didn't understand that it was my suitcase getting full. I just thought that this was the normal progression of the career. And I think highlighting the fact that our suitcase, there are some people who just aren't affected by this stuff. And cheers to them. There are just some people lucky enough to have that resiliency to let things roll off their back. And then there are other people who, I like to say, and I think we talked about this before, and I'll continue with the suitcase analogy, where we all come into this job with a suitcase. Some of them are big, giant trunks, and just some of them are little tiny carry-ons. And some of our suitcases are already pretty full from all the shit we've already experienced in our life up until that point. And some of us, some of them are empty. And that speaks to the what, where, when, and how, what is going to affect us has to do with, the suitcase that we came in with. You could have a rookie who has one traumatizing call, and that could be their suitcase full. If they're not aware of the process of looking at their childhood trauma and looking at how they feel about their emotions and how they express themselves and yada, yada, all that other stuff. My warning signs, I think it's highlighting that this is not, feeling like shit is not the normal progression of the job. Feeling like shit is a symptom of a full suitcase. That's the analogy. We'll continue with that. And the sooner you recognize it, the sooner you can begin to address it, and the sooner you can begin to unpack it and start to learn the tools to keep it from getting to that overflowing point again. So I would say withdrawing, drinking too much, substance use in this profession is quite high. It comes along with having a lot of really big, hard feelings, and that is a way that some of us choose to not even deal with, I would say cope with, coping mechanisms. Anger, having a hair trigger when it comes to getting upset or getting angry. Those are just some things that come to the top of my mind about maybe some early warning signs that you can look at in yourself.
Real quick before we jump back in. Firefighters don't leave each other behind. We look out for our own. Right now, there's a firefighter out there, maybe a rookie, maybe a seasoned veteran, who needs this podcast. They need the lessons, the mindset, and the training tips. But they'll never get them unless you help them. Here's how you can help right now. On Apple Podcasts, tap the 5 stars, then scroll down and write just a few words about what the show has done for you. On Spotify, tap the 3 dots, select Rate Show, and drop your rating. It takes less than 60 seconds, it costs you nothing, and it helps one more firefighter get better, stronger, and more prepared. We look out for each other. This is one small way that you can pay it forward. All right, back to the show. I also like, and I'm looking at your article, we're talking about compassion fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get to the compassion fatigue, tell us a little bit more about the article. Because by the time this goes live, the articles are going to be published by like a week or so.
The article that I wrote is called Grief on the Front Line, Managing Our Unseen Wounds. And it discusses specifically the concepts of duty-bound grief and kind of how it affects us. It introduces the topic, tells us a little about what it is. What it is a very unique form of grief that we experience. And it's unique to us because of the repeated exposures to trauma, not being able to kind of like feel our emotions in the moment because we need to carry out our duties. And also that this type of grief just isn't acknowledged.
So it's sort of that wake-up call, that call to action for us to acknowledge it, to say, hey, this is just one more of those things that we stuff down, that we pretend is not there, I guess we kind of acknowledge it, because people come to you and they say, hey, man, you good? And that's the extent of it. And I'm like, no, man, I just, this dude canoed his head open, and I got to witness it all, along with the note that he left for his mom. That shit was wild.
Right.
Yeah,
Let's
sure, I'm good. Right. Let's go get a pizza on the way home and then joke about it. And inside, we're like, what the hell was that just happened?
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is, so after I came home from my stay there, the one thing that was absolutely different for me was going on calls like that and feeling guilty that like the younger members had to see that stuff. Like, I'm already, I'm already broken. Let me do this, to try to, keep them from, which, you just can't do. Well, there's only a couple of us, and sometimes we need all of us. Obviously, hopefully, sometimes there are, times where we can kind of shield people that don't need to witness that. But I had like guilt of, and looking at the faces of the young people and just seeing myself as like a 24-year-old who was like, this job is awesome. And just, I don't know. There's something about just seeing the look on the face of a new person witnessing something like that for the first time. And it's just like, it's heartbreaking.
For those young people, what can they do when they experience this? What sort of skills or what sort of actions can they take to mitigate? Because we're going to be exposed to that anyway. Like it's
right.
That's the job. But what sort of things can they do to minimize that impact?
So one of my favorite quotes is, what is predictable is preventable. And in that same breath, I will say that accumulation is the first step toward any disease process. So if you look at all the statistics, it is incredibly predictable that people in this line of work are going to suffer mental health injuries way more often than the general public. Our suicide rates are much higher than the general public. Our substance abuse is much higher than the general public. Lots of different symptoms of this, serial traumatization, combined with lack of tools on what to do. The best and first thing that I would recommend is talking about it. And as you know, sitting around the kitchen table is like sometimes the very best therapy that anybody can ask for. Of course, it depends on your shift and if they actually are being honest about how they're feeling, and if it's an environment where you can say like, man, that was fucked up. Like, I did not like that. Instead of like, yeah, it's all good, whatever. And everybody has their own way of dealing with it. I'm not putting down the, yeah, it's all good, whatever, if that's true. But typically in my experience, if someone says, yeah, it's all good, whatever, they actually mean like either A, I don't feel comfortable talking about it with you, or I don't feel comfortable expressing my emotions to begin with. So let's just move on to the next thing and we're going to pretend like it never happened. So I think talking about it is the first thing. Acknowledging it, talking about it, allowing yourself to feel how you feel, and kind of just seeing how it goes. If it's sticking with you after some time, or if it's, changing or affecting your life or your work, or you're doing things that are unhealthy to cope with the things that are coming up about it, then it might be time to do something a little bit more in depth. But talking about it is the most important aspect of this, in my opinion.
So it's looking at those peers, looking at the people who have been there. Is that what I'm getting out of this?
Yes. So yes, you have your peer support team, like your official peer support team. And you also have your peers, your buddies, your coworkers,
Right.
And each are equally important. And even if you don't have somebody on your shift to talk to, ideally you have a close shift where at least someone on your shift you feel comfortable talking to. And if not, then your support team. And if not, hopefully you have someone in your close, non-fire department friend group or your family that you can talk to. Just talking to someone that you trust about what happened or how you feel, even if you don't want to give them details. I know sometimes divulging details to non-fire department people feels like you're just traumatizing someone.
Oh my God, it's so bad for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, you'll know the right place and the right time. I mean, gosh, I've heard so many horror stories of people who've gone to a therapist for the first time, and they're like, "This is what I'm here to talk about," and the therapist is like, I can't do this," and it's like, okay, well, that went well.
Oh, that's awful. I shouldn't be laughing about that.
It happens though, and that is why it's so important that we have the resources and the information and like a list of vetted therapists who know us. Maybe don't know us personally, but who know about our community, who know like we're gonna crack a fucking dark, dank joke about something completely inappropriate. We're going to laugh when we should be probably crying. And we're going to tell you some shit that you probably wish that you've never heard. And like that list of people but they need to be vetted. We can't just go to, Joe Schmo who knows nothing about us and think we're going to get any useful
anything out of them.
Right.
What's your take on CISM versus peer support models?
In my opinion, CISM is trash. I despise the act of essentially attacking a crew of people right after a call and forcing them to sit down and talk about something that they really shouldn't be forced to talk about. Like, if you want to go back to your station and talk with your people that were on that call with you, by all means. But this is not like forced family fun. Okay. This is not how this works. It is not effective. It puts a horrible taste in everyone's mouth. And it's just not, it's not an effective way to help, the point of it is to help people. And I think it's more damaging than it is helpful. The CISM pathway.
Yeah. And I don't want to, maybe I've been lucky that I've experienced both pathways, if that's the word to use.
Uh-huh.
And CISM felt like checking a box. Don't get me wrong, we did drop the ball also when we went through our line of duty death, because even as peers, like when other departments' peer support teams showed up and they were following us around, we found out later is that we basically had bodyguards in case we wanted to, like, I don't know, go into the bathroom and off ourselves. Like, yo, what?
Right.
That's kind of weird. And I think it comes from a good place of people who always want to be the helpers, not knowing how to help. And they just start throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Unfortunately, a lot of times what sticks is some bizarro world shit. Like, I've heard stories of chaplains suggesting that they would talk to, the family who just lost their loved ones and their kids, and they were going to use, God, I can't believe this really happened. Like, they were going to use like puppets and marionettes to explain what happened to their loved one. And we're all like, you hear that and you're like, excuse me, like, what? Like, we're going to bring the Muppets to say that their loved one's gone? Like, I feel that we can pick a more normalized approach to this. And I get it. It's leadership trying to help. And I think that takes us to the point of leadership has to be in tune with what's happening to their people. What sort of steps can leadership take? Can those chief officers, like, if in a utopian ideal world where you can have your thoughts be embedded in a department chief's mind on how to handle this duty-bound grief, how to handle these people who are going through these hard times, what would you tell them?
And before I talk about the chiefs, I want to start at the station level for our station officers. And I think we do a decently good job at this. But it's knowing your people, having an open door policy where if they need to talk to you, they know that they can come and talk to you, and, you know, you are for a lack of a better term, I hate to use it, but a safe person to come in and talk to. And to know your people well enough to be able to identify when something is not okay. I will tell you that when I was not okay, I thought I was okay. And my shift knew something was off and something was wrong. And they were like, "Are you good?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm good." Like, and, you know, they just didn't know how to help me. And I can't blame them because I didn't know how to help me. I didn't know how deeply affected I was. So I think putting tools in place for officers to be able to discreetly approach someone where they're recognizing, you know, the red flags, are you isolating yourself from your shift? Are you calling out way more than normal? Are you coming to work smelling like a liquor store? Are you, you know, is your marriage okay? Is your relationship okay? Is, you know, is there something going on in your personal life? Like, I just think knowing your people on a pretty personal level, you know, as much as everybody wants to divulge, obviously, and being able to identify when something is off or when something is different, to kind of be able to address it discreetly, you know, not like, we're going to send you somewhere, like, with kindness and, you know, like you would a family member. As far as the chiefs go, I don't know why the concept of mental health and wellness is so, I guess, difficult to grasp, in the sense of it is more than just providing the EAP number. It is more than having a peer support or CISM protocol. It is more than a protocol. Like, these are human beings.
These are people. Yeah.
And we're all very different. And we're all going to handle and digest and process and whatever we do very, very, very differently. So I guess if I could say anything to the chiefs, it would just be, treat us like human beings, not just cogs in a machine. And when we say that we're having a problem, we had a prior chief in our department who is no longer with us. Well, he's alive, but he's no longer with us, who said the Center of Excellence was a place for people to go have a vacation. And oh, great, now everybody's going to be going on vacation there. I have never heard a more disgusting thing uttered. I mean, you may as well just say, "I do not give a fuck about you or how you're feeling. Please go run the calls."
You little cog in my machine. Go get me those eMeds reports. Go make sure the stats look good.
Right. And like, I get it. We have a job to do. I absolutely understand that we have a job to do, and it's a very, very important job.
But it can't be done without the people.
It can't be done without the people, and the people need to be healthy, and that's physically and mentally. And, you know, there needs to be more. We need regular wellness trainings and events and seminars. You know, we have RIT training. We have all kinds of different, you know, trainings pertaining to our job specifically. All very important. But the wellness aspect is equally as important to those other trainings.
And it shouldn't be a career advancer for people, meaning mental health within the fire service has come to the forefront in the last few years. We've seen, like you said, a rash of suicides. We've all had people, like we know people who have been impacted by the way that, like, those systemic issues that we deal with within the fire service. And there's always that one opportunistic person or group of people who will say, haha, this is how I will make my career. And I think that devalues the whole point of caring about your people. If you are that person promoting yourself on the backs of the broad term mental health for firefighter, it's crystal clear. It is crystal clear that you're just going for the buzzwords and you are doing these things in a way that's going to bring the attention to yourself because, oh, suddenly I am the savior and everyone's going to look at me so great because I am dealing with mental health. In the meantime, the people who need it are still suffering because they don't trust you.
And you know, unfortunately, that's kind of what we're dealing with now in that, you know, the bare minimum is being done. We have the EAP number, which I have called it, and it is a shit show to, you know, find. It's just horrible. And when someone is in crisis, one of the analogies I like to say is the farmer goes to the hospital. I don't know if you've heard it before, but if a farmer shows up at the emergency room, you have to know that he or she has tried first, second, third, fourth, and fifth line of defense, probably tried to stitch his damn leg back on, anything rather than going to the emergency room. Because he's got shit to do. It's the same thing for us. If we are asking for help, it is typically an emergency. And we don't need to be given an EAP number and say, call this number, jump through these hoops, wait 3 months for an appointment with a clinician who doesn't know anything about you. We're not given the information of what is the best kind of therapy for trauma. What are the best therapists? What are some questions I can ask my therapist when I'm interviewing them? What are some things that I can do if I don't want to go to therapy? What if I need treatment, but I can't leave and go somewhere for 30 days? Like, this information should be readily available. It should be readily available. And it's not. And it is a detriment to us. It is a detriment.
So we've kind of looked at the dark side of things. Let's try to look at some of the lighter side. Taking those lessons that you've learned and taking your experience in the fire service, dealing with your own mental health struggles, talking to those younger folks, what do you tell them to survive and thrive? Because a lot of times we end up in that survival mode and we can't take that step to the thriving. So when they're in that survival state, how do they get out of it into the thriving state and remain there more than in the survival state?
Sure. So the first thing I would tell them is it takes time. It is not something that happens overnight. Just like if you gain 200 pounds, you're not losing 200 pounds in a week.
Not with that attitude.
Not with that attitude. Unless I cut off a leg or something like that.
I was going to say, you've heard of Ozempic and what's the other new, the Tren, and yeah.
That's true. That's
Adderall.
true.
Let's go.
But I think, something that I've heard over and over and over and over again in my career is, what are you complaining about? You know what you signed up for.
Such empathy, right?
No.
Did we know what we signed up for? I don't think we did.
No, I did not. I had no idea. I had no idea what I was signing up for. I thought I was signing up to care for people who are having emergencies. And, my dad, who is a retired trooper, as I mentioned before, one of the first things he said to me when I went into this profession is, this stuff catches up with you. Make sure you are taking care of yourself. It catches up with you. And as a, young 24-year-old, I was like, okay, thanks for that. And you listen, you hear, and until you know, you don't know. You don't know until you know. So, you have to understand that knowing yourself, knowing your body, knowing your mind, being able to recognize when there's an issue, having a community and a network in place prior to this, time where you might need to cry for help, having an established network of people that you can go to that you trust, mentors, and everybody. Therapy isn't for everybody. That's completely fine. I get it. I totally get that. But maybe having other things, having a hobby outside of the fire service, something that you feel passionate about, having friends outside of the fire service, having just something where when you get off work, you can find a way to complete that stress cycle and get out of that chronic stress. Your cortisol and your epinephrine, your hormones are all out of whack. Like, so many men have low T and women's hormones are all over the friggin' place, and people are gaining weight like gangbusters because their cortisol, is so high for so long. And then they get adrenal fatigue, and then they get chronic inflammation. I think what a lot of people don't understand, but we're learning it the hard way, most of us, is not addressing these things, but absolutely will go from mental distress to physical illness. And it will come out of us one way or another. So kind of taking care of ourselves along the way is the ideal way to do it, as opposed to kind of just putting out the fire once we realize, ignoring it until there's a blazing inferno. And then you're like, well, shit, now I have a whole lot of work to do.
As we're getting ready to close this and looking back on the career that you've had, starting as young as you did and to the point that you are now, what is the one failure that you cherish the most?
I would say thinking I was different, thinking this wouldn't affect me, thinking I am emotionally intelligent. I feel my emotions. Like this stuff sucks, but it's just part of what it is. Thinking that I was immune to it. That is my biggest failure. And I don't know if it's youth or lack of education, lack of tools, whatever it is, but I can see now that was not true, first of all. And it led to a lot of really big problems, but without those problems, I wouldn't be here today. And I really feel like, I can now say I'm grateful for all that shit.
I love it. Rachael, let's talk about the article. Where can people find it?
So the article will be published in GEMS, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services, on February 4th.
And we're setting up this podcast so this goes live after the fact. So go on GEMS, find the article. We'll throw a link to it in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you being so candid and talking about your story with this audience. And I'm hopeful and I believe that somebody will take value out of this and will not make the same mistakes that we have made.
Thank you so much.